Welcome. Thank you, Rhonda. So we have an agenda. You should be able to see our agenda. Is the agenda showing? Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, great. So we will go ahead and start with our legislative update. Ms. Susan, do you want me to pull up the tracking sheet? Would that help you? You're on mute.
Did you get the document I sent about an hour ago?
Oh, no, I did not.
That is a more updated, it's not updated. The tracking document is there, but it's sort of a working document. So I went in and cleaned it up and pulled out the changes that I wanted to highlight.
Let me look and make sure.
Not, you can give me control and I can probably pull it up.
Okay.
If you'll give me control to it.
So how can I do that? Can you?
So if you,
I have to do it, I think, on my.
oh yes. Sorry, Rhonda, I forget.
All right. Let me hang on 1 second. All right. Let's see. See if you can do it now, Susan.
Okay.
You can share your screen.
Yeah. I think I got it. Wait a minute. Let me make sure I've got the right one because I was working on 2 or 3 of them today. Voila. Let me just make sure I pulled up the right one right quick. All right, just give me 1 second.
You're fine.
Can y'all see that?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is go through what passed and what that means. And then I will talk about what didn't pass. And to kind of frame it up, going into this session, we knew there were a handful of bills that were pretty much blessed, I guess is a good word, by the new lieutenant governor, who wanted to streamline some of the processes that related to foster care. We knew that the DHS Commissioner Broche, was working with the lieutenant governor. And so you will see highlighted the bills in yellow that passed, that were part of this package, and then perhaps a few more that may not necessarily be related to foster care. And you'll notice that all of the legislation that was in the interest of child welfare, that was supported by the division, ended up passing. And that's a pretty big deal. And so I think that overall, the session was a big, what could have been perceived as some loose ends, especially as they relate to court and court proceedings with a dependent child and with depriving a child from the bench. So kind of going in, that was some framework. The theme this year seemed to be around, overall, in general, around safety and around education. And but it was also a very good year for DHS. The bills that did not pass either just really never, they crossed over, but they didn't go anywhere, or they got caught up in some very last minute, from what I understand, kind of a political game of chess, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. It seems that this happens more often than not, and it's how it works. So first and foremost, we have House Bill 19, which is the budget that will go into effect on July 1st. The most important thing to everyone on this call is a $2,000 cost of living adjustment for full-time benefit eligible state employees effective July 1st. I did the math. I think it's about $1 an hour, maybe 96 cents per hour, which is not nothing. Then some of this other language, some of it is routine, but of note, if you add together the additional funding that was given in the supplemental budget to the funding that was given for next year, it's a significant number of new case managers to, as I understand it, be specifically used for Medicaid. This is important because it also opens the door to somewhat of a career path for persons who may not have a college degree. I think there has to be some sort of customer service experience, but to come in and to work the Medicaid redeterminations first, get in a little time, then can move to a little bit higher of a case manager level. I will say as a sidebar that there will be some adjustments made on other positions. I don't know what they are yet, but a change was put in place around the requirements, minimum requirements of education for several positions across the board for state employees. And so I have not received a list of what those positions will be for DHS, but I know it's coming, and that will just be removing some of the criteria as entry-level requirements and allowing people who, again, may not have a four-year college degree, but may have some related experience to apply. That is, of course, trying to attract more people to the positions of case managers. Okay, then more money was added for housing options for hoteled youth. I don't think we've seen the last of this conversation. Some things were put in place, but certainly not an across-the-board solution yet. But the conversation has been started. All of the legislation that was introduced this year, if it didn't pass, there's a second chance that it will pass next year. It goes in 2-year cycles. So I do think we'll see this conversation continue. Let me see if I can figure out how to work my, I know y'all can see this, but let me see if I can figure out how to work this so it moves. Oh, there we go. Okay. Some money was added for child caring institutions and also provide respite for those with who are caring for Alzheimer's family members or related dementias. And then some administrative change, this 107, a change in DHS child support services contract. I don't know what that entails. It's not a whole lot of money, so I'm thinking it's a pretty short thing. So the big news on the budget is that it added the raise, it added additional Medicaid positions, and it is adding some additional funding for the hoteling situation as we move forward in trying to grapple with that. The next bill that passed and is included as part of this package to streamline.
Hey, Susan,
Yes.
I was wanting to ask you a question.
Oh, yes. Sorry, please.
I know you're on the roll, but any mention on the $2,000 at the top with the benefit for eligible state employees? What exactly does eligible mean? Does that mean, is this one of those where they have to have an all-around score of a 3 on a PMP to get it, or what do you know?
No, this is a cost of living increase. It's not a performance-based increase. So based on what has happened in the past, it would be implemented across the board when I read that, but I'm going to make a note of some things I need to clarify, and I will try to clarify that, Danny. I think that is, some positions are contract.
That makes sense. I just was curious because sometimes when they do that means that we've got a quick turnaround on getting those P&Ps done, like in May, at the end of May, so they can have everything processed in June to be able to get that. And I'm just trying to think ahead. So I appreciate it.
That's smart. Let me clarify that. I believe it has to do more with full-time and someone working to the point that they are eligible to access the benefits versus a contracted person or an hourly paid person. That was my guess, but I'll get some more information on that. Good question. Okay, Senate Bill 216. It allows for respite care for foster parent. Ooh, loaner. That should say longer. Sorry, excuse my spell check. And so short term means used to mean no more than 72. It has been changed to, I copied from the bill what this is, up to 72 consecutive hours or longer. And there was also some play around with babysitting, that term, to say just occasional short-term respite care, removing the babysitting word. And so it did not specify how long that could go on. It kind of left that up to the discretion of the department, but it allows for longer than what was in place before. That passed. It is moving forward and is, I believe, already on the governor's desk to be signed. Any questions about 216?
I like the idea, but it could be problematic.
Right. It's just never as simple as it seems, right?
No, it's not. I mean, I think the key word is it's a discretion of the department, because I can see where the foster parent could say it's at their discretion.
Right. Right. And then you get into sort of inconsistent applications, and that then drives new legislation that tweaks with this. And it seems to just kind of go on.
We'll take it. We'll take it.
Yeah. Senate Bill 133. This was in the final hours of the last day of session that this passed through both chambers. This is the big one. This is the one that tried to create the uniform process for disposition in cases. And I know in an ideal world, we would have had language in there that would have shored up who's responsible for what and placed more of a commitment to other partners. But this is a start. And it is a long piece of legislation. And I would encourage you can go through the link here to look at all of what is listed there. But basically, it includes multiple steps that have to be taken prior to placement of a CHINS child. It requires some records that are gathered, certain conditions to be met, consultation with different partners. And if you want to read through it, I think that it's going to be a little while before our policy section has been able to go through it and put some parameters around it about what we will do in this event. Also, I believe that the juvenile court judges are going to have to get together and get some procedural practices in place. So this is a taste of it. How it is going to play out is sort of like the CHINS legislation. It looks one way and then it plays out another. I did include some language that was in a voices update that I thought cleared it up a little bit. It seems to be related to the dual designation of a child. So when a child could be both DJJ and DFACS committed, that, and I don't think it's just to those children, but specifically in those cases, provides a framework that juvenile court must do in order before placing that child with DHS. Big piece of legislation. I would encourage you to look at it and just see the kind of things that are being required. I don't know how realistic it is that all of this will be available at the time of the 72-hour hearing, and what will be the practice thereof to gather that.
Hey, Susan,
Yes.
sorry, real quick. Are you able to share this document with us?
Yes, Vicky, did you get it?
I don't think it ever came through.
Okay. Yes,
But-
I sent it to Gretchen and Vicky, but it may have gotten hung up in my, yes, we will get this to you. I was thinking you might have it before to this, but it must not have gotten to Vicky and Gretchen. And so I will get it to them and get it out to y'all, or just send it to everybody who's on this appointment if I have access to everybody. I'll do that. Let me see if I can do it right now.
Thank you. No rush. I just like to have it to kind of.
Yes,
go off.
absolutely. Yes, you'll have it. You'll have it today. Any questions about 133? All right.
Has this been communicated to the judges?
Yes, yes. I know there were some judges there.
Yeah, we have one particular that was opposed to it. They didn't like that. They felt like we were handcuffing them.
Yes, it was not a popular bill. And sometimes you can tell what the constituent feedback to the legislators is if you look at the votes. And while this moved through the Senate, in the end, the House vote was had much more opposition. It passed, but it passed with many more nays than yes. It didn't quite have that level of conflict in the Senate, but it got a lot of attention. It was discussed a lot. We had lots of judges that testified in some of the hearings or shared information. And honestly, I honestly kind of had written it off. I had heard by that Friday before the final day, if it had not made it out to the floor for a vote by the end of that week, it was pretty much dead. And this was one of the few bills that lived on to get that vote. So I'm a little surprised.
Who do we thank?
I think you thank your commissioner. Definitely first and foremost. I think you thank your legislative liaisons. That would be Jackie Tate's section. And of course, anybody who reached out, we certainly did, to support this. In fact, I heard late in the session that GPHSA had said we didn't support this, and I had to clear that up quickly. That was just not true. I don't know where it came from. I think the person merged some comments that I made about the Foster Parents Bill of Rights and this legislation. They mixed up my comments on the two, but certainly the commissioner and her team really worked hard to get this in front of the right people and get the support that it was needed. And you know, it's not always a popular place to be. So I wrote her myself, and she responded just thanking her for the work that she did. And I bet she'd love to hear from you as well. So consider that. 134. This was we were confused last time we met about this one, because we thought that it might have opened the door for some tinkering around for kids' testimony. I sent it to Danny, who was our subject matter expert on this. the comments. And basically what this one was younger children, called tender children, historically have not been required to be sworn in when offering testimony for multiple court proceedings. This has been the case for years and years. For some reason, termination of parental rights proceedings were omitted from that list. And so it just adds that if a child is required and has any testimony that would be valid to a TPR case, that a tender child of a young age would not be required to be sworn in, mainly because they might not understand all of that. And so it sounded pretty benign once finally
Yeah,
kind of got to
The
the bottom.
video you sent where he explained it summed it up perfectly. The wording of the bill itself was confusing.
Yes. So that's just to let you know, TPR has been added to that list and children do not have to be sworn in.
So Susan, did it give an age? Is it 12 and under?
You know what? It might have. Let me look right quick, see if I can find I've got another computer here with the legislation pulled up on it. Let me see if I can find it right quick. If not, I can get back to you with that. In the video, in the little YouTube video, Senator Cowser kept referring to the tender children, which I found a little humorous. They're young, but okay, I can't find, oh, wait a minute, let me see here. I don't see an age written here.
I just wonder how is he classifying tender?
Tender. You know, a bigger part of this legislation, not bigger, but something that wasn't talked about much, and I'm glad you asked this question because it reminded me, used to be there was a 60-day notification requirement for documents. And because in so many of these cases, if it's a dependency hearing or maybe even TPR shouldn't move that quickly, but some of the other court proceedings, it would delay them moving as fast as they should. And so they narrowed that window from 60 days to a 15-day. And if you had any objection to any of the information or the reports being filed, then you could, so you had 7 days to say that you opposed the information that was the notification that you had received. But it narrowed that window so that things can move along a little more quickly. I don't see an age in here, just quickly glancing at it. Hang on, I'm going to look at the actual version and see if I see an age. Juvenile and all juvenile dependency adjudications. Yeah, I don't see an age, Ms. Hatcher, in here. Let me ask about that, because that's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Because you go from a child not having to be sworn in to trying to get legal representation for the older youth. And so it's kind of on one hand saying they aren't old enough to understand being sworn in, to they're also old enough to not have legal representation, but they're old enough to be held accountable for offenses. So there is a little bit of disagreement there. Okay. House Bill 460. We have, last year we talked about a bill that was a raise the age bill, basically, and this is kind of related to what we were just talking about, where children or youth who had certain offenses would be tried in juvenile court and not adult court, and this is nonviolent offenses, but that they would be able to have their case heard in juvenile court. Lots of feedback around that bill. That bill sort of seemed to die, and you'll see its newest iteration did not pass this year either. But a little piece of it is included in House Bill 460, which says that a child receiving extended care youth services is provided the right to counsel for all stages of the dependency proceedings. This does give any child who's part of a guardianship or proceeding around dependency, that they would receive the right to counsel. It does not get to the intent of that raise the age bill, but it is a little something. I don't know what's going to happen next year, if we will see yet another attempt to put that together. This year's bill really only asked that a committee be established to study it, and it didn't pass. So there's some powerful opposition to that legislation that I've heard is coming from some law enforcement. That's what I've heard. Any questions about 460? Okay, the last piece of legislation that was considered like supported by DHS is House Bill 129, which allows pregnant women who do not have other children to receive TANF if eligible. The eligibility requirements apply, and they in and of themselves limit being able to access TANF if you have very many resources or if you have very much income. But if you do qualify, and you can receive TANF and receive the Medicaid that goes along with it if you are pregnant. All right, then I don't have any idea about how this is one that OFI will receive some information on tracking and how that will be set up, if it'll be presumptive. I don't know how it's going to fall out in implementation. Senate Bill 131. This bill relates to guardianship. It really kind of shored up some of the language, not a lot that will impact practice, but it does make a conviction of a parent for murder or voluntary manslaughter of the other parent a mandatory basis for removing a child from the parent. And that seems kind of, if one parent kills the other parent, then that seems like that would be common sense, but that language was added in there, and that the court can exercise its discretion. So I included that. I don't know that that wasn't part of the law before, but for whatever reason, it was specifically added to this. The rest of this legislation just seemed like it was wordsmithing some things around guardianship. Any questions about 131? All right, Senate Bill 84 is really more related to the Division of Aging, and it adds some protection for the elderly against financial fraud. It ended up over more in the banking area. However, it does make the penalties for financial fraud steeper and gives some protections within that. House Bill 242, it is mostly around the penalties for traffic violations and how the money gained from those traffic violations will be applied in different areas. And this is not specifically stated in the legislation. However, Carol, who's our liaison, told us to watch this as she thought there would be something in there that would be for youth in care and being able to access the driver's ed training. And I was told by the legislative liaisons for DHS and by Carol that that is in this legislation, although it's not in the one online. But evidently it does extend to whoever the funding is going to for that driver's education. It extends to youth in care. I know it's very difficult for a youth in care to get a driver's license, and so I thought that was noteworthy. And then Senate Bill 135 really relates to child support, and it aligns some newer practices for establishing paternity with the current law so that all of it can be used legally when establishing paternity. All right, any questions about the legislation that passed? Let me see if I was going to make another note. This is not directly related, but I know that from time to time, we have youth in care, older youth in care, who identify in the LGBTQ kind of category. And Senate Bill 140 was was discussed widely. If you look at the legislation, Senate Bill 140 is the one that prohibits certain surgical procedures for trans youth and other things. And it was a bill that got a lot of conversation. I read as much as I could about it and then looked at some other states, and it does look like that the legislation in Georgia is not quite as far reaching as some other states and not as restrictive. However, if you look at the voting pattern on this legislation, it's not on our sheet because we didn't specifically track it, but it was one that I had jotted down that I might mention. Not a overwhelming level of support on either. I mean, it was a lot of nays versus the yays. It did eventually end up passing. So that's just FYI. Okay, let's look at what did not pass. Foster Parents' Bill of Rights. This bill was largely supported by other, like Voices for Children and other advocates for children. And that's why I think maybe my comments on this in a forum were taken out of context and attributed to the bill that we did want. My comments were on Senate Bill 230, not that we opposed it, but that we had some reservations about it because it set up the scenario that foster parents or fictive kin or relative caregivers, if it gave them right to counsel, then everybody could just lawyer up and we would not be able to reach a common ground with some issues that relate to children placed. And so we didn't feel like we could wholeheartedly support it, although there were parts of it that we agreed with. But in the end, it did not get passed. It passed the Senate, which is the chamber to which it originated, was assigned to the House Juvenile Justice Committee, but never went anywhere out of there. It didn't get a recommendation. It might come back up, or it might be, there was the Senate resolution that was set up to study foster care. Senate resolution, I can't remember the number, but there was a Senate resolution to establish a committee to look at foster care and foster care practices. It This committee was originated out of the hoteling discussion. It is not a let's call on the carpet all of the practices of foster care. But it was set up after we got the federal inquiry into the hoteling issue as a response to that. And this foster parents Bill of Rights could be entertained by that committee. I don't know. It did not make it past this year. The House Bill 462 was the former raise the age bill. It passed the House where it originated, but failed to progress to the Senate. We kind of already talked about this one. House Bill 291 would have added to the list of providers who were authorized to participate in any of the discussion and processes for the appointment or termination of guardians. This passed the House. This also would have been would have added a little more authority to a whole lot of people to weigh in on this discussion. And I think it had the potential to be a little messy. It doesn't matter. It passed the House where it originated, but was tabled in the Senate. House Bill 571 really, according to DHS, it was one of the ones that got caught up in this sort of political chess game toward the end. It was supported on both sides, really no controversy, no comments about it. All it wanted to do was to extend the Alzheimer's and related dementia state plan from 3 years to 4 years. And it just kind of died. It didn't make it to the end. Very likely to be passed next year. It's already been recommitted to its committee. So let's talk a minute about this political chess game. If you went to the Capitol visit on March 6th, then we sat in on a Senate, I don't think if it was a hearing or they were talking through the bills that had not crossed over yet. And we happened to be in there during the conversation around sports betting. And there were 3 big pieces of legislation that were high priority. Sports betting was one of them, private school vouchers was one of them, and the medical marijuana legislation was one of them. After 3-6, when these bills, especially sports betting, did not cross over, it got added to the soapbox derby legislation that did cross over. And so there was this hope that after crossover day, sports betting would live on in House Bill 237, which was the soapbox derby. And in the end, it did not pass. And so in the maneuvering of trying to get this higher priority legislation passed, some things that were less controversial and seemed to be pretty benign just did not make it through. And so another piece of legislation that up till the very end was the school voucher. It doesn't really have anything to do with DHS in our department, but the private school vouchers, that was one of the pieces of legislation that, in order to try to get the support that was needed, some other pieces were held back, to my understanding. And so some of the things that died because couldn't get that private school voucher moved through. And then the medical marijuana was the same, just could not get the support that was needed to get it passed. And so some bills were held back, hopefully as collateral to get the votes that were needed for these things, but ultimately they could not get the votes. And so that's just a little context. And House Bill 571 was evidently one of those bills held back in part of all of that. This next one, the resolution 159, it relates to child support, and there was creating a study committee on the parenting time that's in the child support statute. It did not pass. I don't know a lot about that one, but I try to include anything related to DHS. Another piece of legislation that just seemed kind of benign was allowing adults who were adopted as a child to have access to their original birth certificate. There seemed to be support for that. It was passed out of the Senate on March 6th, but never progressed to the final day. And I would say this final House Bill 520, if you ask the advocates of children what was the legislation that they had hoped would get passed that did not make it, and this has very little to do with us, except for that it is an extension of the mental health bill, the big piece of legislation that was passed last year. And the nice thing about this legislation, had it passed, is it got back to these community groups that would coordinate and work together to reduce jail admissions, to work to find solutions for kids in crisis, and to get the right level of care assigned and make a referral. And it died right there at the end. It didn't get the support it needed. It's likely going to come back up. It is a huge piece of legislation if you want to read it and be informed for next year, but it did not get the support that was needed. And so that is sort of the quick rundown of what made it and what didn't make it. I will also tell you, as a sidebar, maybe of interest, that in the governor's budget for next year, starting July 1st, full support of HOPE was restored. And many of you have kids who may be in college or headed to college, and that's great news. Also interesting is the cut toward universities. The universities did not get the level of funding that they have received in the past. And I don't know the history behind that, but they did not get the increases that many of the other departments got. So that's just FYI. Any questions? Anybody confused? It's a lot of moving parts. I get confused myself, trying to track it and figure out which bill went where.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what circles back around and makes it back to the table and discussion and changes and rewrites and different things like that. So lot going on though. That's
Yeah, it was a very busy year. I don't remember, well, I mean, I haven't been tracking it for decades, but where there have been that many pieces of legislation that the department wanted. You might remember last year that we had a pretty benign piece of legislation that just kind of died on the last day. I will say that the Senate resolution that laid out the calendar for this year and went ahead and set the last day of session, said that there would be, no Fridays would not have any serious legislative days. It did seem to give some structure this year, so that it's always frantic at the last minute, but so many more of the bills had already passed and we knew where they stood up until on that last day, called Sine Die, that then I remember before. So, like I said, with, I think it was 133, I had just assumed it wasn't going to make it because almost everything else had passed on and was ready. So it was much more organized. I would expect next year to follow the same kind of, we have a schedule, have a calendar, and we know what's going on. I'll tell you also, it's as easy as ever to go in and listen to the hearings. If you go to a piece of legislation from the links that are provided here, and you find the committee that it was assigned to, the committee hearings are right there, YouTube, you can listen. You know, I mean, you'd have to really be interested in one to probably devote that level of time, but it's just so much easier to get the full story now and not try to be present at all of the hearings that are going on, because you can listen not in real time and you can watch. And so that's a great improvement. I think that's a gift of the pandemic.
Absolutely, because I know when we started tracking them 2 or 3 years ago, if you didn't catch it live, you missed it. I mean, there wasn't any replays, you know, you had to really be on top of everything, and it was so much harder to follow everything that was going on. It was almost impossible unless you had a team that was, you know, dividing and conquering. It was tough, but there wasn't that many bills either that seemed to affect DHS. So I remember a couple of years ago, it wasn't as robust as it seems to be now. So thank you, Susan. You do such a tremendous job in keeping up with what's going on and keeping us updated. It's very much appreciated.
Well, I'll leave you with this thought with legislation. I feel like we're poised since we have a second year. We have several bills that have sort of laid the foundation for some real work to shore up some of the dependency issues, and it's much easier to modify the language in a bill than it is to just get it passed completely. And so I'm really interested to see what the next step will be, because I think we've laid a foundation of support. I think the commissioner should be feeling really good about the level of support she has with the legislators. And, you know, we could be poised to really try to push it a little bit further next year.
And I encourage you all, if you haven't caught the commissioner presenting the budget, it's quite impressive.
And if you want to watch that, you can click on the link to the House Bill 19 for the upcoming, or 18 previously, and it'll take you to that page, and then from there it'll take you to the presentations, or you can go to appropriations, the committee, and you'll see the videos if you just want to watch it. I imagine she will do that for the staff here soon. I think she probably will.
And I want to say that I shared it. You had given an update, I don't know, a few weeks ago, right after she had done the presentation, and you had a link, and that's where I actually saw it.
Yes, I tried to link those committees and where you could
Yes.
watch them there, and the archives are still there. So if you hadn't had a chance before now and you want to catch up, just please do.
Yeah, and any of the emails that I send out for updates or meeting requests should have that information, as well as all of our legislative committee meetings are recorded, so you can search them on YouTube at any time if you miss any. So that's a good thing there too. So Susan, you have anything else on legislative updates?
No, not unless there's some questions. I am going to follow up to see about the age on Senate Bill 134. And I will also ask about the benefit eligible, just to see if it's not different than what we talked about, then you won't hear from me. But if it is, I will clarify if that means y'all are going to be hustling to get your performance reviews done.
All right, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so upcoming trainings and meetings, we do have a couple of virtual workshops. That one is actually this week. So if you haven't seen them, please go to the GPHSA website. And I think you should have gotten an email with those and links how to register. So virtual workshops coming up. And then due to our ban or the pullback on travel for now, we're not going to be able to go to Lake Lanier, unfortunately. But hopefully, tentatively, next August, this coming August, maybe we'll get to have our Savannah meeting. We'll see how things go. But our next committee meeting is May the 2nd, Tuesday at 3 p.m. And we can go over any comments, concerns, feedback, anybody have anything they would like to talk about, share, questions? Because our legislative session is over for this year. It won't start up again until January next year. So if you have any ideas on what you'd like to see the legislative committee do in our somewhat downtime, I know we have the academy that's still rocking on, so that's available as well. But any feedback, any suggestions, we are open to them. Anybody have anything? You're very quiet.
And this is Susan Cooper. Can you stay on for just a second? After
Susan Boatwright?
Susan, yeah. So this
Okay.
is Susan Cooper. Can you stay on for just a second?
I can.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, well, if there's not anything else, we will give you 10 minutes back of your scheduled meeting time. And we thank you for your engagement and your support, and we can't do this without you. Thank you so much. Rhonda, if you can stop the recording now if you'd like, and I'll let everybody know